God damn. Welcome, everyone, to the Solana Foundation Validator discussion. It is not May 9th. It is June 13th, 2024. I did not update the slide. A lot of stuff to get to today. So Validator updates. We've got a survey that we'd like you all to fill out on which OS version you're running. So I'll describe that in just a minute. I want to talk a little bit about stake-weighted QoS and the state of things for operators. I'd love feedback there. Going to talk about Validator education workshops and solicit some input there as well about what you all want for the next one. Planning to do one next week. Some upcoming events: Breakpoint, Block Zero, StakePoint, MEV Day. Lots and lots of stuff going on around Breakpoint, so excited to see that. And finally, open discussion if we've got other topics that we want to cover. So let's get started. Open up the chat here. Yeah, so first of all, congratulations, everyone. Thanks for updating. Version 1.18 is out. We've got over 90% of stake as of this morning on 1.18. So great work. It was a pretty timely upgrade. So happy to see everyone be so responsive. 1.18 feature activation should be happening relatively soon. There's no planned date yet, but if you have not already upgraded, please upgrade as soon as possible. RPC providers, especially if you have not started upgrading your fleet, please do so now. We don't have a timeline yet for 1.18 feature activations, but it is right around the corner, so be aware. As far as testnet goes, 1.18.16 is the recommended version. We're looking for more testing there for 1.18.16. So anyone who's not upgraded yet, please do so. I think we've got around 80% of stake upgraded right now, but it is the required version for SFTP. So if you're an SFTP operator, please upgrade before the end of the epoch, which is about 4 or 5 hours away, I think. And yeah, 2.0 should be cut and released relatively soon, probably sometime next week. So be on the lookout for that. Check the comments. No questions, comment. Any questions or comments about either of those updates? Nope. All right, moving along. So as I mentioned, the Anza team is looking for feedback on the operating system that you all are running. So I'm going to put this in the channel or in the chat. Hopefully everyone right now could just take a second and fill this out. That'd be super helpful. Let me copy this link. Putting it in the chat now. There was a question from Ferric about the same up-down schedule for 2.0. So typically when the cluster goes from a minor version to a new minor version, in this case 1.18 to 2.0, after the release has gone to mainnet, there's no up and downgrade. It's just we're upgrading to 2.0 and we're soaking that for about 3 months until that goes to mainnet. Before that goes to mainnet, there's an up and down cycle. Yeah, Ferric, go ahead.
No, I'm just wondering if it's going to be as crazy as the rapid up and down that we were doing for 1.17 to 1.18, where we went up and down multiple times. And
yeah, that was a procedural sort of issue for that one. So originally we intended to bring a different version to mainnet. We changed plans. I think it was 1.18.14 and then changed it to 1.18.15. So just to be safe, we did the upgrade and downgrade cycle with 15 as well as 14. Typically, we'd only do that once. We wouldn't do it twice.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I've just not been here long enough, so I don't know if this was normal or not. But thanks.
Yeah, no, good question. It's not normal, but you know, in the case of unexpected bugs, there's going to be potentially multiple cycles of that.
Gotcha.
Yeah, good question. Okay, so yeah, I put the survey in the chat. If everyone could take a minute and please fill that out. Basically just looking for how much stake you have on the network and what your operating system that you're currently running is. It's anonymous. We're not collecting your email address. You don't even have to put your pub key there if you don't want to. That information is helpful, but just trying to get an idea of how many operators are running which OSs. It's useful for Anza for future releases to know. Maybe I can show that real quick. Yeah. Yeah, I think the survey is pretty self-explanatory, but if you have any questions, please let me know. Moving right along. I'll post this in Discord as well. All right. Stake-weighted QoS. I'm also looking for feedback here and maybe just some updates. So for those who are not aware, stake-weighted QoS had a bug in it in 117 related to set identity. So if you were on 117 and you were trying to use set identity to change your identity from one that maybe had no stake to your typical identity that is associated with a staked vote account, there was an issue changing the certificate there that essentially made it look like you had no stake on the network. That should be resolved in 118. So if you attempted to set up a stake-weighted QoS relationship with an RPC server and it wasn't working for whatever reason, advise you to try again and give feedback. Also, 118 has a bug with stake-weighted QoS and the central scheduler. Yeah, there's a question if that bug's resolved in 118.15. Yes, it should be. So this first issue with set identity should be resolved in 118.15. Yeah, fair. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, never mind.
Oh, sure. And then also 118.15 has an issue with the central scheduler. Essentially, the way stake-weighted QoS is intended to work, you get a transaction sent to your validator from an RPC server or whatever. You forward that transaction to the leader, and the only staked connections with a minimum amount of stake should have access to that forwarding. So that is broken with the central scheduler because the central scheduler was not doing forwarding for staked connections. There's a backport here that should be resolving that issue. Let me put the links in the chat real quick. So here is the set identity bug. And here is the backport. One sec. Too many windows. There we go. Here's the backport for the central scheduler change. So that is not yet in 118.15, hopefully in a release very soon. But my main point in pointing all this out is to kind of tell you the state of things and ask for feedback on what you all are experiencing who are using stake-weighted QoS. Are there other issues that I'm not aware of? Other blockers? Please raise your hand, let me know. Anybody? Is anyone using it in production right now? With an RPC specifically? Yeah, go ahead, Matthias.
Yeah, so we were using it until the last update to the 118.15. That's why I've asked if the issue should be resolved, and we are using the new scheduler, and I didn't have time to dig really deep into it. So yeah, maybe just an issue on our side, but it stopped working for me after I've updated to the 118.15. Before it was working.
Yeah, so if you're using the central scheduler and 118.15, that will be the cause of the bug. You could switch to the default scheduler, which should resolve that issue.
Okay, perfect. I will try this. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, Zan, go ahead.
Yeah, just a more general question about stake-weighted QoS. You know, I get the occasional odd request from some random person to enable it for them. And I assume they're proposing some kind of payment arrangement. I've never gotten far enough to, you know, really discuss that, because my answer has always been, it doesn't really work. So we can try it, but you're not going to like the results. And that's been the case every time because of these bugs. Luckily, these are getting fixed. So we're going to enter a new phase where potentially this can be offered. So one thing I'm curious what other people think about, like, what does it mean to offer this to some random person? Like, I'm happy to offer that as a service, but I'm unhappy if it just means that I'm being used as a conduit for submitting transactions that, you know, are in some way harmful or bad, and that these people couldn't otherwise get onto the network. So like, how do people evaluate whether or not, it's safe to enable SWQS for some random party?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm curious what others are thinking on that.
I would definitely suggest talking to them, have an actual call, find out who they are and what they're doing. We do that. So with our bandwidth marketplace right now, we know who all the clients are. Sometimes they have ridiculous requests, like sending 10,000 packets per second, and they think that's totally okay. I push back and say, no, that's not okay. How many do you really need? And so, yeah, I think that's where due diligence comes into play. There's plenty of bandwidth available, so I don't think this is an issue of price, like it's going to be really expensive. It's really about the QoS part of it. Like, let's make sure that, we're allowing responsible people to have privileged access. So that's my take on it.
Is there some way that you check or evaluate the transactions that are being submitted by these parties, just to double check and make sure they haven't violated what they said they were going to do and are doing something else?
Well, and for reference, I mean, we've actually set up a completely different system outside of the standard software. So we have a router that sits in the middle. We can enforce rate limits into that router. So if somebody agrees, if we agree to 100 packets per second, and if they send 1,000, we'll just simply drop 900. So we've kind of built a lot of that enforcement into the layer, that extra layer that we built.
But if they're doing something like some kind of liquidity sniping, or I have no idea what people do that, could be construed potentially unsavory transactions, you don't really check for those? Well,
at this point, I literally know everybody that we're onboarding. Because they've been longtime clients, so we know who they are. But to answer your question, I think if it was somebody I don't know, yeah, I'd probably do some extra research. I'd try to figure out what's going on there. Again, for me, it's about the QoS part of this thing, and making sure that, we've got quality players on the system.
Do you monitor transaction landing rate with your system, Brian, or is it mainly just about how many packets you're getting through?
We do. We're still surfacing those metrics for our clients. We've got some stuff internally. And landing rate, though, is usually completely unrelated to QoS. The best analogy that I've been able to come up with so far for SWQoS is to think of a nightclub, a really hot, popular nightclub with a really long line waiting to get in. And so as validators, what we can do is we can bring somebody to the front of the line. They can get to know the bouncer, say hi, make a new best friend, and then we can get them in the door. But we can't take them to the bar. We can't buy them a drink. They still need to buy their own drink. They still need to leave a tip. So, they have to have well-constructed transactions, proper priority fees, proper CU budgets, all that stuff. So that's kind of the difference here. Landing rate is more up to the client than it is to us. So,
yeah, that makes sense. It's funny. I had a very similar analogy, except it was one step back that involved roads and a bar.
Okay, nice. They both end at a bar. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, fair. Go ahead.
Hey Zan, I know I've talked to you about this before, and Blake too. I guess my question is, why can't you just let people? And I'm just coming from the perspective of like people that are trying to land transactions, and SWQS is one way that they can do this, that they can at least try to improve that. And why don't you just let them do like 10 packets a second, and if they abuse that, then you can shame them and throw them out. But I feel like the feature's been out for a while, and there's very little uptake because people are suspicious of what is going to come through, and which makes sense, especially if there's no way to tell if you're being used to send bad traffic. But if it's just a function of good actors trying to just land transactions, why don't you just limit them or rate limit them? And you're already kind of doing it, right, with TX ingest. So is there any other like uncomfortableness around that, or just curious what you think?
Well, for me, I mean, it's really not about, the traffic. I'm not as worried about that as I am about I've railed against, in public discussion against what, the transactions that could be considered user harmful. And because I want to see Solana used for a whole variety of purposes, and I don't want to see people getting, screwed over constantly and discouraged with using Solana. And given that I've railed against it, it would really suck if I suddenly enabled my validator to be a great source for people that want to submit those kinds of transactions to use SWQS and get them through. And so, it's really mostly about trying to avoid being a hypocrite on that. Otherwise, that's really my only reason. I'm not as worried about the volume as much I am about the quality of those transactions. And finding out later that I enabled something that I didn't even realize was in some way construed as harmful and was doing something bad to some users somewhere. And I don't even know how to get ahead of that. I don't even know how to evaluate all the different things people could do and whether or not I should allow them. So that's why I asked the question.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with Brian's sort of suggestion of, or the way they're doing things, which is actually having a conversation, not some random dude you met on Discord is like, give me all your stake weighted access. But the people that I'm sort of, talking to are also people that are not trying to do harmful things to the network. It's even simple things like program deploys, right? Like when devs try to deploy programs and they can't, they have to keep waiting or retrying. It's things like that, which is why I'm wondering if you just decided to let a certain number of packets through. But yeah, unfortunately hard to tell if there's malicious activity going on.
Well, in the short term, I think I'll just focus on RPC providers like, Triton or like Helios, who, may want to expand their ability to land transactions using SWQS on my validator and assume that they're doing that diligence, at least to some degree. That would sort of be where I would start, probably. But it doesn't stop, the randos from peppering me with requests. So I got to have a strategy for that, too.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question. Maybe this is for Brian Long. In 117, SWQS wasn't really working because Quick wasn't working.
Right.
How is that looking now?
So we're not using any of the ONSA stack. We rolled our own from end to end. But yeah, there were all sorts of troubles, right? TPU over Quick had all sorts of challenges. And like many of you have expressed previously, the old way of doing it just wasn't working. And so instead, we built a sidecar that runs. It can either run on the validator or it can run as a standalone. A light client like Mango's Light RPC or Helios's Atlas. It could run like that or just run it on the node. And then what we're doing is we're just using TPU forward. So, and only to the leaders, right? So it's not like we're definitely not trying to spam every validator on the cluster. We're just trying to get it to the leader as efficiently as possible. So that's how we approached it. But I'm glad to see these other issues are getting sorted out. And because we do want it to work well, where people can make one-on-one deals and relationships.
Yeah, it's exciting to see that we're tying all the loose ends, because I think people were trying 117 and maybe they're using hot swapping. So that's why QoS wasn't working. Then maybe we thought it was Quick, and now it's the central scheduler. So we'll be able to have some.
Yeah. It was all the things. Yeah.
And we can narrow it down, be like, yeah, it's working, and not because of 5 other things.
Right. Yep.
Cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Austin, go ahead.
Hey, all. The other thing I was thinking of that I think our team's going to potentially start working on is some sort of transaction parser that could potentially help with kind of narrowing down those requests. And this is something super preliminary, but I think if we can figure out the intent of those users, I think it would go a long way. So I think that's one thing that we're working on. And then kind of another thing that's a tiny bit off subject, but related to the stake identity portion. I've completed a complete end-to-end Ansible identity transfer that I'm going to be open sourcing this week. That should be able to help all of you that aren't currently doing that with uptime. So just wanted to give those two updates.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, share it and MB validators would be useful. All right, no other hands. Appreciate the feedback, and yeah, if other things come up with stake-weighted QoS, please just tag me in Discord so I know. Yeah, a plug on who we is would be useful as well. John, go ahead.
Hey, so I just want to jump in on behalf of Helios here in terms of what we're doing on some of this stuff. So we don't have as much sophistication in terms of the transaction quality control as we want to. It's something we're very actively looking into. But right now, we've been looking a lot more at priority fees. So we banned based on priority fees. If the fee is over, the fee has to be over a certain amount. That's one of the signals we use, whether or not we want to send it to a stake-weighted endpoint or not. And then right now, we've been just looking at IPs, like banning IPs. So we'll try to figure out if there's certain spammy providers that are sending a lot of garbage, and we're doing it both in terms of quality based on, is this provider spamming, and then are their clients, typically these bad actors are the ones who tend to also like to spam. So that's what we've been doing, not anything too crazy at this point.
I'm curious, are you saying this from your stake node perspective or from RPC, or both?
Both.
That makes sense.
So we have the tool that that Kurt presented at the community call, which we use on the validator side to ban IPs. And then as far as the RPC provider side, that one we don't have to do it based on IP. That one we can actually look at if certain clients are spammy, we can either rate limit them or like if it's a bigger client, we'll usually just talk to them. We have good relationships. We'll say, like, what are you doing? Is this expected? Did your key leak? Stuff like that. So both sides.
Thanks, makes sense. All right, any other thoughts on this? Otherwise, we can move along. Let me see if there's hands. Nope. All right, moving on. Thank you for the feedback. And again, if you have any stake-weighted QoS feedback, thoughts, whatever, please just tag me in Discord so I'm aware. I'd like to kind of be on top of what's going on here. Switching gears, there's a validator educational workshop coming up next week. There's some feedback from Ferric that I got in MB planning, but if other people have ideas, I'd love to hear it now. There's been talk for a couple of months of a hardware discussion. I think that's useful because I think the hardware spec has been in flux a little bit lately. Ferric provided some updates to that. And yeah, I think it will be changing over time. There's some indications from Anza that the specs that might actually go down a bit. So I'd love a discussion on that. Another thought was just generally what's changed in 118. Do other people have ideas for the topic? Personally, I'm kind of leaning towards the hardware one. Through the chat now. No feedback. Well, I'll ping again and be planning. I think, yes, +1 for the hardware. Thank you. Yeah, okay, I'll come through validator beginners as well. I think there's definitely, like, it's a useful thing to add to the educational workshop playlist just for new people getting started to know kind of what to look for. I definitely got some feedback that the spec is useful, but it doesn't really give you a good idea of what to optimize for. And I think a good discussion on this would kind of make that a little more clear. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to be mainly framing that in terms of a discussion, less so in terms of like a lecture. I want kind of feedback from you all on what you think the most important things are. Yep. All right, cool. If you all are not familiar, I'm going to drop a link for the playlist as well. So this is the current set of education workshops on YouTube. If you're curious, gotten good feedback, please take a look. Let me know what you think. Reminder about Breakpoint. So Breakpoint 2024 will be in Singapore this year. If you have not gotten a ticket and plan to go, highly suggest you start planning now. There's a lot of events going on at that time, including F1. So it's going to be a pricey and packed city, but it should be a really fun event. Hoping to see a lot of you there. Yeah, the tickets here are at solana.com/breakpoint. I'll put that in the chat just a second. The cool thing about this Breakpoint is the planned programming for Breakpoint itself is going to be a lot smaller than last year. I think we had 3 or maybe 4 days last year. This year, it's only going to be 2 days for Breakpoint itself, so that side events can be more of the star of the show. We've got a lot of Validator-related side events, so really awesome to see. Block Zero is going to be on the 18th. Stake Point will be on the 19th, and MEV DeFi Day will also be on the 19th. All the links are in this Breakpoint side events link, which I will post as well. Give me a sec to grab those. Awesome, yeah. Brian put the link for Block Zero. You should be able to see all the events here on this side events page. So it looks like there'll also be a drip, something for drip on the 20th, and Network State is also happening around that same time. Let me also grab the link for Breakpoint. Thanks, Brian. Yeah, so please check those out. Love to see you all, especially at Block Zero. It's an event specifically for validators, so it'd be great to see validators participate and be there. That's all the content I've got. Any other topics people want to bring up? Yeah, go ahead, Bernie.
Yeah, just a quick question. In one of the last calls, we've been discussing the firewall settings, and I personally am using Brian's TPU traffic classifier, as many of us are. I just wanted to ask the open questions. Are there any recommendations with 18.15 now live to make any changes to the firewall rules? I mean, Quick is working better now, I presume, so maybe we can let more non-gossip in or something. Kind of sad that Brian had a drop now, but I'm sure there's some other opinions out here. Michael, from your end, maybe? Michael Hubbard.
Yeah, Zan, go
ahead. I believe, although I'm not sure, I never used the classifier. So, but I did spend a lot of time looking at, transaction sources maybe a month ago to 3 weeks ago. And it was my opinion that it wasn't always a good sort of like delineation, whether or not gossip or non-gossip. I mean, at the very beginning, it was a good delineation, but I think it pretty quickly moved to a point where, those that were going to spam and whatever learned that they just had to, stop being non-gossip sources. And so I'm not sure it's as effective, that singular sort of delineation, gossip versus non-gossip. And I do also think that, it's an evolving thing. The transaction sources are changing how they operate every week. And in the last week or two, as I looked at it, I saw that it was becoming harder to sort of identify unique transaction sources as having very specific bad behavior. It felt to me like they were kind of, all coming together onto sort of, for example, one of the things I always evaluated was, do they only submit a ton of really, like low fee ARBs? And there were originally a bunch of IPs that all they submitted was really low fee ARBs, but it doesn't feel like there's that. I don't see them anymore. It's like they have blended their low fee ARBs in with other transactions, so it's harder to identify them by that metric. So the answer I guess I'm giving is, I'm not quite sure that the classifier is that useful anymore, but others who are using it might be able to say something about it. And in my experience, I've actually reduced my firewall usage considerably because the scheduler is much better now. And my pipe is big enough that I'm not really bandwidth limited. So and my validator is capable enough that I'm not limited on receiving packets. They get pretty well organized by the central scheduler. And so I kind of let most things in now. The only difference is that I try to detect when there's like a single block of IPs all sending the same transactions. I limit them down to 2 or 3 of the IPs in that block. I don't want to see the same transactions from 40 IPs, but I don't mind receiving it from 2 or 3. That's sort of the only thing I'm personally focused on right now, is just trying to reduce the number of duplicate transactions coming in from large blocks of IPs. That's all I have to say about that. And my results have been good. I had very, very good fees until everyone else got on 118, and now everyone's kind of 118 is much better at picking up the high fee transactions. So everyone's now kind of getting those more evenly than before.
Thank you.
Kurt, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, Dan touched on a lot of the points I would have touched on as well. But yeah, the value of just blocking gossip has, or non-gossip rather, has gone down significantly. So we're looking into like more advanced metrics in terms of duplicate rate, sig failures, some other networking layer specific things, but really just looking for identifying bad actors, explicitly bad actors, and then reducing the amount of duplicates that we're accepting.
Makes sense.
Cool, thanks.
Austin, go ahead.
So 2 questions. One, this is more focused towards Zan and Kurt, but I guess what's your guys' threshold that you've been seeing good progress with duplicates, duplicate transactions? Or is it 2, 3? What's kind of been your good mark there?
I mean, my process has fallen apart a little bit in the last couple of weeks because it's become less of a critical issue, unfortunately, and I've kind of focused on other things. But generally, all I do now is I use my TX ingest thing that can, and I have another thing I wrote, which I haven't released yet, which is similar, but it just makes it a little easier for me to collate the details. And then I look at what IPs are submitting the most transactions. And then I look at the transactions those IPs are submitting, and I look at what other IPs are submitting the same transactions. And then I try to like reduce the set so that I like, and it's very ad hoc. I mean, from week to week, the IPs will change. So I kind of have to always stay on top of it. What Kurt's trying to do, make an automated tool, is 1,000 times better, but I haven't gotten that sophisticated yet. So I'm mostly just looking at the IPs submitting the most transactions. Like I'll sort it and I'll say the top 20 will submit, say, 10 times as many transactions as, as the average. I'll look at what they're doing, and I'll try to block out the ones that look like they're submitting a lot of duplicates or a lot of kind of low quality transactions. The other thing I do is that then I then do just an overall sort by fee, and then I find those IPs that are only submitting low fee transactions, except for Pyth and Chainlink. They also kind of submit somewhat low fee transactions, but they're really valuable, so I never block them. But anyone else that only submits like really, really tiny fees and they submit a ton of transactions, I'm just like, I don't need your crap. It'll come in probably elsewhere anyway. I don't need you to be spamming me with this stuff. That's all I really do, and it's very unsophisticated, very ad hoc.
Right. Awesome. And then the other point that I had a question on, and this is more geared towards the core team. Is there been any progress on the validator gating within Discord and potentially within these Google Meets to kind of, obviously we're talking about some of these security portions here that, there may be some people joining that, is trying to mitigate those. So I didn't know if there's been any sort of gating progress there.
Yeah, I've actually got an update on that. So we've got a community member, B-Man, who's working on an app called PubKey, and he's modified it in such a way that it would make sense for validator gated roles. Next steps are really on me at this point. I've got to test it out internally, and then next steps would be to beta test it with validators in Discord. I would say that what you mentioned, though, it's not really a security tool in the sense that we would have private conversations, right? The the intent would be to have conversations that are only validators, that you have proof that you're a validator to join. But I don't think there's, at least the way I'm envisioning it right now, I don't think it will be conversations that only validators can see. And if that, yeah, that's a miss. Maybe if validators want that, we can talk about it, but that's not the current goal.
Got it. Understood. And yeah, I could totally see both sides of that. And obviously we're trying to be as open as possible, and with decentralization. So yeah, I totally understand your point of view there, but I'm kind of excited to see that come to fruition with strictly validators being able to discuss with each other without any sort of interruption. So thank you for that. I appreciate the update there.
Yeah, no problem. Big thank you to B-Man and PubKey. He's really done the hard work. So awesome to see community involvement. Any other thoughts or questions before we close it down? Yeah, Brian, go ahead.
Hey guys, this is Brian from Judo. I just wanted to, we had the discussion earlier about kind of vetting counterparties in stake-weighted QoS. I think, stake-weighted QoS is relatively benign as you're doing this, but I think there's, obviously a lot of chatter about some kind of activities on Solana in terms of more malicious MEV that surfaced on Sunday and Monday, and that we know that a lot of validators are getting proposals from kind of random parties, probably similar to stake-weighted QoS, or maybe they kind of mentioned stake-weighted QoS. But as part of that process, just understand that changes outside of stake-weighted QoS, like potentially to relayers or other mechanisms in your validator, have much higher scope for kind of potential malicious activity. And so be very skeptical of any kind of random inbounds you get from certain parties asking for kind of side deals, compensation, whatever. And I think there's no reason any of that should be a secret. And so if they're asking you to not, if the code is closed source, if they're asking you not to ask around, to vet with other validators what their proposal is, that's definitely a red flag in my mind. So I mean, hopefully I think all of you guys on this call are probably already on top of that, but just something to be aware of, that there are a lot of potentially dubious actors in the space reaching out to validators like yourselves right now for an advantage, and you should be very hesitant to proceed with anything with those actors until you've kind of talked to others in the validator community, people from the Solana Foundation, people from Jito, about kind of what the scope of what they can do based on what they're asking for. So just a PSA, because we know people are getting this every single day. It's something to be aware of.
Thank you, Brian. One more plug for the OS survey as well. I put it in chat one more time. If you've not filled it out, please do so. Any information would be super helpful on what you're currently running in production for your mainnet validator. Yeah, and I think with that, we will close down the call. Thank you all. Next Solana Foundation validator call will be the second Thursday of July, but there will be a community call in approximately 2 weeks. I'll notify you all for that as well. Yeah, Zan, go ahead.
Just so you know, on that form you submitted, it says as an example 100,000 comma something, but if you put commas, it seems like it doesn't accept it. So
good call out. I will edit that right now. Yeah, it's validating that's a number, so the commas won't work. Yep, I will edit that. But yeah, please put the amount of SOL you have, or amount of stake you have in SOL, please. All right, cool. Thank you, everyone.